If you've played in a band, you'll know that what the backing music does can completely change how your chords sound. What was a minor chord shape can become major, and vice versa, depending on where the bass note is. Let's start with this simple example. Here, I'm moving the same shape on the 2nd, 3rd and 4th strings between two positions. You'll probably associate these shapes with the root bass on the 5th string, giving us two minor chords, C sharp minor and B minor. But now take a listen to how the voicing of these shapes changes with a different bass root. We're technically no longer playing C sharp minor and B minor, even though we can recognize what we're playing as part of those shapes. Let's break down what's going on here. We started on a shape that would be associated with a minor triad if the root was in its familiar position. However, if we move the bass root down 2 whole steps, that minor triad becomes part of a major 7th chord. In other words, the bass defines the chord quality. So in this example, C sharp minor becomes A major 7, using exactly the same triad form. This is because these two chords share the same notes. You could also see C sharp minor as containing the major 3rd, 5th and major 7th intervals of A major 7. This means one way we can harmonize A major 7 is to play a C sharp minor triad anywhere on the neck. Here I'm using 4 string shapes. So the major 7th chord can be seen as a specific inversion of a related minor triad. And this relative positioning doesn't just work with triad shapes. We can also place scales in these relative positions. Take G major 7, which, using what we've learned, is relative to B minor. Therefore, we could play B minor pentatonic, including all the licks we know from this scale, over G major or G major 7 to get that major 7th sound in our lead. And of course, where there's a chord, there's an arpeggio, so we can use a minor arpeggio to give any major chord a major 7th colour. Here I'm playing a C sharp minor arpeggio over A major. The general concept we're moving towards here is that you can use triads, scales and arpeggios in relative positions to the chords or bass you're playing over to colour your music in different ways. Another example of this concept. Here I'm playing a D major triad. But hear how this changes when the bass is on B. We now get a B minor 7 chord. So there's a relationship of shared notes between D major and B minor 7. The D major triad gives us the minor 3rd, 5th and minor 7th intervals of B minor 7. As you can see, there's a minor 3rd interval between the relative bass positions. But to help you see this relationship more clearly, try this exercise. B flat major becomes G minor 7 when we move the bass down to its relative position. major becomes C sharp minor 7. We can also use this relative major-minor concept to interchange fluidly between major and minor. For example, here I start on A major, move the triad shape up 3 frets, or a minor third, and we get A minor 7. This kind of major-minor interchange is useful when playing over power chords, which are major-minor neutral, or simply a bass note. Just like before, we can also use the relative triad as an arpeggio. So over G minor, for example, we could play a B-flat major arpeggio to get the G minor 7 sound. Because there's no G root in there, it has a more open sound. So those are just 2 basic examples of using triads in relative positions to the root bass or chord to create different chord colours. You can use them to give your harmonies and melodies more mileage. Let's try a slightly more complex example. Here I'm playing an E major triad across the neck using simple 3-string shapes. Now listen to how the sound of these shapes change when we play them over A major. Over A, the intervals of E major become 5, 7 and 9. So if we play this E major triad over an A major chord, we get the combined intervals that make up a major 9th chord. To help you visualize this relationship, you can see the E root of the triad we're playing as a 5th interval above the bass root, or the chord we're playing over, A or A major in this case. We could do a similar thing over G major, for example. D is a 5th above G, so try playing D major over the G, whether as a chord or an arpeggio. Here's another example of creating an extended chord voicing from a relative triad position. Here I'm playing a regular B minor triad. Now let's hear this played over an E minor chord. Playing this B minor triad adds a minor 7th and 9th to the E minor triad, giving us a minor 9th chord. And just like the previous example, the triad we're playing can be seen as rooted a 5th above the backing chord. So we effectively have 2 triad forms, E minor and B minor, that we can interchange over E minor, such as with this arpeggio example. In that example, I started with a B minor arpeggio and then moved seamlessly into an E minor arpeggio. To the listener, it just sounds like an extension of E minor because of the chord we're playing over. Let's look at one final example. Here I've laid out a B flat minor triad on the top 3 strings. Now let's hear it over an E flat major chord. The B flat minor triad has added a minor 7th and 9th to E flat major, giving us a dominant ninth flavour. Conveniently, we can use the same interval relationship as the two previous examples to find our relative triad. B flat is a fifth interval from E flat. And like before, we can use this relative triad as an arpeggio to colour the major or dominant seventh chord. Here I'm starting with an E flat major arpeggio, moving into B flat minor, before ending on E flat major again. So the general concept here is that we're using those familiar major and minor triads in relative positions to the chord or bass we're playing over. When we do this, we can extend the chord being played, both harmonically and melodically, using those familiar triad shapes and patterns. By combining them with the triad being played on the root, you can lay the foundations for more complex and flowing harmonies and melodies, something we'll be sure to explore further in future lessons. If you want more help with making the most of triads, take a look at my Chord Connections course, linked in the description. Please also don't forget to like and share this video if it's helped. Cheers.